17-year-old Mercy Whitmore sat in the back of her father's wagon, hands pressed against her belly, where life was beginning to grow, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the preacher's perfect daughter, but Deacon Blake Morrison had been so kind when he'd told her she was special, that God had made her beautiful for a reason. His whispered promises about marriage had led her to trust him completely. Her father had discovered her condition when she'd been sick every morning for a week. Reverend Joshua Whitmore didn't ask questions. He simply declared her cursed before God. The whole congregation turned against her when he announced her shame from the pulpit. Even Deacon Morrison had stood in that church and called her a temptress who'd led him astray. Now the wagon climbed higher into the mountains, each turn taking her further from everything she'd known. Her father hadn't spoken since they'd left town, his jaw set like stone. Her wrists were raw from the rope he'd used to tie her hands, claiming she might try to jump and add suicide to her sins. The ropes weren't just restraint, they were a reminder that she was no longer his daughter, just cargo being delivered. When smoke appeared in the distance, Mercy's heart began to pound. The cabin was smaller than she'd expected, built from dark logs and nestled against a hillside. Animal hides hung from the porch railings, and an axe was buried deep in a chopping stump beside the door. The man who stepped out was everything Mercy had nightmares about. Ridge Hawthorne stood nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. But it was his face that made her gasp. The left side was a mass of scars, twisted and pulled tight from terrible burns. The scars ran from temple to jaw, pulling his left eye into a permanent squint and twisting his mouth into what looked like a snarl. "This is her," Reverend Whitmore said, without looking at Mercy. "The one I wrote you about. She's carrying the devil's seed, and the Lord has seen fit to send her to you for judgment." Ridge Hawthorne studied Mercy with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. There was no kindness in his gaze, but no cruelty either, just the flat look of a man who'd learned not to expect much from the world. Her father untied the ropes with rough jerks, leaving her skin red and bleeding. "She's willful," he said, speaking about Mercy as if she weren't there. "Thinks she knows better than God's word. Perhaps living with the results of sin will teach her humility." When Ridge extended his hand to help her down, Mercy flinched. But his touch was surprisingly gentle, his fingers careful not to grip too tight as he steadied her on shaking legs. "I wash my hands of her," Reverend Whitmore declared, climbing back onto his wagon. "She's made her choice, and now she'll live with it. May God have mercy on her soul, because I will not." The wagon wheels crunched over gravel as her father drove away, never looking back. Mercy watched until the dust settled, leaving her alone with a scarred stranger in the middle of nowhere. "Inside," Ridge said finally, his voice rough from disuse. But the cabin's interior wasn't the den of horrors she'd expected. It was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, wooden table, and shelves lined with books. The floor was swept, the windows let in light, and everything had a place. This wasn't the lair of a madman. It was just the home of someone who lived alone. "You can sleep there," Ridge said, nodding toward a narrow bed in the corner made with rough wool blankets. "I'll take the floor by the fire." Mercy blinked in confusion. He was giving her the bed while he slept on the floor. This wasn't what she had expected at all. That first night, Mercy lay awake listening to the steady breathing of the man sleeping beside the dying fire. She waited for him to get up, to begin whatever her father had arranged, but he never did. When dawn broke, Ridge was already up, stirring something over the fire. The smell of porridge and bacon filled the cabin. Without a word, he placed a wooden bowl before her, filled with thick porridge and bacon strips. Mercy stared at the food, confused. But hunger won over fear, and she ate hungrily. Halfway through the meal, sickness hit her like a fist. She barely made it outside before retching violently. Instead of disgust or anger, Ridge appeared beside her with cool water and a damp cloth. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just waited patiently while she cleaned herself up. Days passed in strange routine. Ridge would leave before dawn with his rifle and traps, returning at dusk with game or fish. Mercy tried to make herself useful, cleaning the cabin, mending clothes, preparing simple meals when her stomach allowed. He never asked her to do these things, never demanded anything at all. It was the end of the second week when Mercy finally found courage to speak. "Why?" she asked as Ridge hung up his coat. "Why what?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Why are you being kind to me? My father sent me here to suffer. He said you would teach me about God's judgment, but you've given me your bed, shared your food, asked nothing of me." Something flickered across Ridge's scarred features. He sat down heavily at the table, his big hands clasped before him. "Your father's a fool, and a cruel one," he said finally. Mercy gasped. No one had ever spoken about her father that way. "I had a father like yours once, man who thought God spoke through his fists, who believed pain was the only teacher worth having. Nearly killed me before I was big enough to stop him." He touched the ruined side of his face. "These scars, they're not from a bear or fire. They're from my father's forge, when he decided I needed to learn about hellfire firsthand. I was 12 years old." Mercy felt the blood drain from her face. "So when your father brought you here and told me you needed to suffer for your sins, I decided you'd suffered enough already. No child, and that's what you are, deserves to be thrown away like garbage for making a mistake." Tears flowed down Mercy's cheeks, not from sadness, but from strange relief. For the first time since her father had discovered her condition, someone was treating her like a human being. "But I did sin. I lay with a man outside marriage. My father says the baby I'm carrying is cursed." Ridge's expression hardened, but not with anger toward her. "That baby is innocent," he said firmly. "Whatever happened between you and its father, that child didn't choose to be born. It's not cursed. It's just a baby that deserves a chance to life." Winter came early, creeping down from the mountain peaks with icy fingers. Mercy's belly was rounding now, clear proof of the life growing inside her. The sickness had mostly passed, replaced by healthy appetite and strength she hadn't felt in months. Ridge had quietly let out her dresses, his big fingers surprisingly skilled with needle and thread. In the evenings, while Mercy mended or read from his surprisingly large collection of books, Ridge would carve by the firelight. His scarred hands moved with patient care, turning rough wood into smooth bowls, spoons, and little animals. It was when she found him in the shed behind the cabin, working on something large and carefully shaped, that she realized what he was making. A cradle, carved from sweet-smelling pine, with rockers that would sway gently and sides high enough to keep a baby safe. She stood in the doorway, watching his massive hands smooth the wood with tender care, and felt her heart crack open. This scarred, frightening man whom her father had called a monster was preparing for her baby with more love than anyone in her family had ever shown. That night, as they sat by the fire with snow falling heavily outside, Mercy told him about Deacon Morrison, about his lies, his promises, the way he'd used her innocence and then abandoned her when the results became real. Ridge's hands clenched as she spoke, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Not at her, she realized, but for her. "Have you ever been married?" Mercy asked when her story was finished. Ridge stared into the fire for a long time. "Once, before the war, before these scars. Her name was Sarah. She died while I was away fighting. Fever took her and our unborn child both. When I came home, all I found were graves and a house full of ghosts." Mercy felt tears prick her eyes. No wonder he'd been so gentle with her pregnancy, so careful with the cradle. He'd lost his own child before it could be born. The blizzard hit 3 days before Christmas, burying the cabin in snow so deep they couldn't open the doors. For 5 days they were trapped together, dependent on stored food and each other's company. It was during those quiet days that something shifted between them. Mercy would catch Ridge watching her with something warmer than concern in his dark eyes. When she'd stumble or feel dizzy, his hands would steady her with gentleness that made her breath catch. On the 3rd night of the storm, Mercy awoke to pain that stole her breath away. The baby was coming, weeks earlier than expected, and there was no doctor, no midwife, no one but Ridge to help her. But Ridge moved with calm skill, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, speaking to her in a voice that was steady and reassuring. "I helped birth calves and foals," he told her when she looked at him with frightened eyes. "The principle's the same. You're strong enough for this." After hours of pain that seemed to tear her apart, Mercy heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's first cry. Ridge placed the tiny, perfect baby in her arms, and Mercy fell in love instantly and completely. She looked up to see Ridge staring at the baby with wonder in his scarred face, his big hands trembling slightly as he reached out to touch one tiny fist. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hope," Mercy said suddenly, looking down at her daughter's perfect face. "Her name is Hope." Ridge nodded, understanding immediately. This baby wasn't the curse her father had called her. She was hope made flesh, a promise that beauty could come from pain. Spring came late but sudden, the snow melting in rushing streams that sang down the mountainside. Mercy walked outside with hope in her arms, breathing air that smelled of pine and possibility. She'd started a garden behind the cabin, her hands remembering skills her mother had taught her. Ridge had cleared the ground and built raised beds, but Mercy did the planting, Hope gurgling happily in a basket nearby. Hope took her first steps that summer, tottering between Mercy and Ridge with determination that made them both laugh. Ridge had carved her toys, a wooden horse, a family of bears, a rattle that she clutched and shook with delight. It was late in July when Sheriff Hayes from the county seat appeared on their trail. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "I'm sorry to be the bearer of difficult news. Your father passed 2 weeks ago. Heart gave out during Sunday service." Mercy felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Ridge's hand found a shoulder, steady and warm. "There's more," Sheriff Hayes continued, looking uncomfortable. "After your father's death, some things came to light. That Deacon Morrison, turns out you weren't the only young woman he took advantage of. 3 other families have come forward. He's fled the territory, but his reputation is ruined." Mercy closed her eyes, feeling a weight lift that she'd carried for over a year. She wasn't the wicked temptress her father had called her. She was a victim who'd been blamed for her attacker's crimes. "The church is looking for you," Sheriff Hayes said. "Some folks feel bad about how you were treated. They're prepared to welcome you back, help you and the baby get established." Mercy looked at Ridge, at the cabin that had become home, at Hope playing with her wooden toys in the afternoon sun. "I appreciate the offer," she said firmly, "but this is where I belong. This is my family." That evening, after the sheriff had gone, Ridge knelt beside Mercy's chair where she sat nursing Hope. In his scarred hands was a ring carved from the same pine as Hope's cradle, smooth and simple and perfect. "I know I'm not much to look at," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you could do better, find a man without scars, without a past like mine, But I love you, Mercy. I love Hope. If you'll have me, I'd like to make this real, make this legal." Mercy set Hope gently in her basket and took Ridge's scarred face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes. "You beautiful, damaged, wonderful man. Don't you know, you already are my husband in every way that matters." They were married a month later by a traveling preacher who asked no questions. They stood beside the stream behind their cabin with Hope gurgling in her arms and the mountains as witness. When Ridge kissed her, his scarred lips gentle against hers, Mercy tasted freedom. Freedom from shame, from judgment, from the weight of other people's expectations. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and wild and completely accepting. Years passed and their family grew. Hope had a baby brother named Samuel and another sister named Grace. The cabin expanded with additional rooms, and Mercy's garden fed not just her family, but others who'd found their way up the mountain seeking refuge. Other young women arrived, pregnant and frightened, abandoned by families who valued reputation over love. Mercy welcomed them all, teaching them to read and write, to tend gardens and babies, to find strength they'd never known existed. The children called Ridge Papa Bear, climbing on his massive frame without fear of his scars. He carved toys for all of them, told stories by the fire, and protected their small community with the fierce devotion of a man who'd finally found his purpose. What had started as punishment had become sanctuary. What had begun as exile had become home. The mountain that was supposed to be Mercy's prison had become the foundation of a new kind of family, built not on blood or law, but on love and choice. Mercy often wrote in the journal Ridge had given her. "My father meant to teach me about God's judgment," she wrote one evening as snow fell softly outside. "Instead, he taught me about God's grace. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the first step toward the best thing that will ever happen to you." On winter evenings, when the wind howled outside and the fire burned bright within, Mercy would look around at her chosen family and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. What her father had intended as the worst punishment became the greatest blessing, proof that sometimes God's mercy comes disguised as judgment, and the places we're sent to be broken are actually where we learn to heal. And that's the end of our tale, partner. Sometimes the worst punishment becomes the greatest blessing, and sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protecting from. But when love finds a way, even in the darkest mountains, it can build something beautiful from the broken pieces. If this story of unexpected grace and second chances touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to Tony Tells Tales for more stories where mercy comes from the most unlikely places. Until next time, remember that sometimes God's greatest gifts come wrapped in what looks like judgment, and the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're born into.